In the heart of every atom lies a power that defies imagination, a power we have harnessed to light our cities, to diagnose disease, and to peer into the deepest secrets of the universe. We accept this fundamental truth of physics as a given, a cornerstone of our modern world, built by celebrated minds whose names are etched into our textbooks. But what if the official record of that discovery is a lie of omission? This isn't merely an academic debate. It is an injustice carved into the annals of science. The 1944 Nobel Prize in Chemistry, one of humanity's highest honors, celebrated the splitting of the atom while systematically erasing the one person who actually understood what it meant. This is Lise Meitner, a brilliant physicist whose mind first comprehended nuclear fission. This video is our mission to provide the narrative justice she was denied, to tell the true story of the woman who changed the world only to be robbed of her legacy. Our story begins not in a high-tech laboratory, but in the fading grandeur of late 19th century Vienna. This was the ordinary world of Lise Meitner, born in 1878 into a progressive Jewish family that encouraged their daughters to think, to learn, and to question. But the world outside their home had firm rules. At the time, Austrian universities were fortresses of male privilege, their doors firmly shut to women. For a young girl captivated by the elegant certainties of mathematics and physics, the path forward was not just unclear, it was declared non-existent. Lise's ambition was, by the standards of her society, a form of rebellion. She studied privately, devouring physics texts, and in 1901, after the laws finally changed, she was one of only 4 women to pass the entrance exam for the University of Vienna. There, she was captivated by the lectures of the great theoretical physicist Ludwig Boltzmann, a man who saw not her gender, but the ferocious intellect in her eyes. Boltzmann's mentorship ignited her passion, and in 1905 she earned her doctorate in physics, the second woman ever to do so at the university. But a doctorate was not a career. Vienna had no place for a female physicist. The call to adventure came from the north, from Berlin, the epicenter of the physics world where Max Planck, the father of quantum theory, held court. It was a pilgrimage to the heart of a revolution. Planck was a traditionalist, on record as being skeptical of women in science, yet he recognized in Meitner an extraordinary talent. In a breach of protocol, he allowed her to attend his lectures, an unheard of exception. In Berlin, she found her other half, the person who would define the next 30 years of her life, a brilliant chemist named Otto Hahn. He was her opposite, in many ways charming, sociable, and an experimentalist, not a theorist. Yet, they formed a perfect partnership. He had a laboratory at the Chemical Institute. She had the theoretical genius to guide his experiments. Their first threshold was a literal one, the basement door. The Institute's director, Emil Fischer, would not permit a woman to work in the main labs, fearing her hair might catch fire. So, Meitner and Hahn set up their first shared laboratory in a former carpenter's shop in the cellar. She was not paid, she was not officially recognized, and she was not even allowed to use the front entrance. This was her crossing the threshold, an entry into the world of elite research, but as an invisible presence. For years, this was their world. Hahn's meticulous chemistry and Meitner's profound physical intuition, working in tandem to unravel the mysteries of radioactivity. Together, they discovered the element protactinium in 1917 citation, physikalische Zeitschrift 1918, a major achievement that finally earned Meitner a position of her own and the respect of her peers, including Albert Einstein, who affectionately called her our Marie Curie. By the 1922nd, she was one of the leading figures in nuclear physics, the head of her own department at the newly formed Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Chemistry. This was her ordeal, the darkest moment. Her passport was void. She was forbidden to leave the country. Her life's work, her home, her very existence were about to be extinguished. Hahn was terrified, not just for her, but of being associated with her. Her allies abroad, Niels Bohr, and a Dutch physicist named Dirk Coster, frantically orchestrated a secret escape. On the morning of the 13th of July 1938, Lise Meitner, 60 years old, walked out of the institute with nothing but a few summer clothes and 10 marks in her purse, pretending to be on a day trip. Coster met her at the train station and smuggled her across the border into Holland. She had lost everything. Her savings, her library, her apartment, and most painfully, the laboratory where she was on the verge of the most important discovery of her life. From Holland, she found a precarious position in Stockholm, a refugee in a country where she had no equipment, no collaborators, and little support. She was isolated, adrift, and deeply depressed, writing to Hahn that her life felt meaningless. But the story she had started in Berlin continued without her. Hahn, along with his assistant Fritz Strassmann, carried on the experiments. She had designed the bombardment of uranium with slow neutrons. They were expecting to find heavier elements, like radium. Instead, their chemical analysis kept turning up something impossible, something that shouldn't be there. Barium, an element roughly half the mass of uranium. Hahn was a brilliant chemist, but he was completely bewildered by this result. In December 1938, he wrote a desperate letter to his exiled partner, the one person he knew could solve the puzzle. "Perhaps you can come up with some sort of fantastic explanation," he wrote. "We know ourselves that it can't actually burst apart into barium." Citation, letter from Hahn to Meitner, the 19th of December 1938. That letter found Meitner in a small Swedish town, where she was spending a lonely Christmas with her physicist nephew Otto Frisch. This was the moment of reward, the seizing of the sword. Frisch found his aunt poring over Hahn's letter, her mind racing. They went for a walk in the snow, Frisch on skis, Meitner keeping pace on foot. As they walked, she began to think. What if the atomic nucleus wasn't a rigid, solid object, but something more like a liquid drop, as Niels Bohr had suggested? A slow neutron striking this unstable, heavy uranium nucleus might cause it to wobble, elongate, and then split. The idea was radical. But Meitner's mind immediately went to the numbers. If the nucleus splits into two smaller nuclei, like barium and krypton, the sum of their masses would be slightly less than the mass of the original uranium nucleus. A tiny fraction of mass would have disappeared. Where did it go? Sitting on a log in the snowy woods, she scribbled on a scrap of paper. She recalled a formula from a man she deeply admired, Albert Einstein. E equals mc2. The lost mass, she calculated, had been converted into a colossal burst of energy. She had not only explained Hahn's baffling result, she had unlocked the secret of the atom. She and Frisch coined a term for this process from cell biology, fission. This was the road back. Meitner and Frisch immediately wrote a paper outlining the theory of nuclear fission, a landmark publication that would change the course of human history. Detation, disintegration of uranium by neutrons, a new type of nuclear reaction. Nature, the 11th of February, 1939. But a critical sequence of events had already unfolded. Before their paper could be published, Hahn rushed his and Strassman's chemical findings into print. Crucially, he did not include Meitner as a co-author, justifying it later by saying the Nazi regime would not have allowed a publication with a Jewish name. He framed the discovery as a feat of chemistry alone, downplaying the essential physics that he himself did not understand. When Meitner's paper appeared shortly after, the scientific community was electrified. The news spread like wildfire. Within months, physicists around the world had confirmed her theory, and the race to build an atomic bomb had begun. The elixir, the knowledge of nuclear fission, had been returned to the world. It was an elixir of terrifying power, one that would end a world war and define the geopolitical landscape for the next century. But the hero who had brewed it was left in the shadows. The world had the discovery, but the narrative was already set. Otto Hahn, the chemist, had discovered nuclear fission. In 1945, the announcement came that the 1944 Nobel Prize in Chemistry was awarded solely to Otto Hahn for the discovery. The committee's report made no mention of her 30 years of foundational work, her leadership of the Berlin team, or her singular, world-changing insight in that snowy Swedish forest. The erasure was complete. Hahn accepted the prize, and in his Nobel lecture, he barely mentioned her name, cementing the injustice into the permanent record of science. Lise Meitner never returned to Germany to live. She was horrified by the military application of her discovery and famously refused an offer to work on the Manhattan Project, stating, "I will have nothing to do with a bomb." Citation: Ruth Lewin Syme, Lise Meitner, A Life in Physics. Her legacy is therefore a complex one. The elixir she gave the world was the pure, beautiful, and terrifying truth of the atom. A truth that led to Hiroshima, but also to the nuclear reactors that power our world and the medical isotopes that save lives. Her name is not in the popular textbooks next to the discovery of fission, but the impact of her mind is all around us, in the very fabric of our atomic age. Decades later, the scientific community made a belated attempt at narrative justice. In 1997, element 109, the heaviest known element in the universe at the time, was officially named Meitnerium in her honor, a fitting tribute as she is the only non-mythological woman to have an element named exclusively for her. But her story is more than a corrected footnote. It is a profound lesson in the fragility of truth, a case study in how prejudice, ambition, and the chaos of history can conspire to erase a legacy. It forces us to ask, how many other names have been forgotten? Whose stories have yet to be told? History is not a static record. It is an ongoing conversation. If you believe the contributions of Lise Meitner deserve to be remembered and shared, subscribing is the most effective way to help these stories find the audience they have always deserved.